My name is Juliana Nykolaiszyn, and I'm with the Oklahoma State University Library. Today is Wednesday, March 19th, 2008, and I'm in Tulsa, Oklahoma, interviewing Nancy Feldman. This interview is being conducted as part of the inductees of the Oklahoma Women's Hall of Fame Oral History Project. Nancy was inducted into the Oklahoma Women's Hall of Fame in 1995. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.
Well, let's begin by learning a little more about you. Could you tell us where you grew up and give us some insight into your early life?
Yes, I had a very good early life, which I'm sure I draw upon a lot. Two very loving parents, happily married, a younger brother who was a pest, and an older sister who was a model. Standard thing. And I grew up in a suburb of Chicago, and it was a kind of unique suburb. It had a really fine John Dewey school. And my father, not many people know about the class of 13 at the University of Chicago, but that was my father's class. And a whole bunch of them, knowing each other, moved to Highland Park because the schools were so good, and they wanted, when they had children, they were all just starting, to have their children in good schools. So I grew up with this kind of amazing thing of people who had gone to college with my parents, all of whom we called aunt and uncle, and all of whom had total control over us. So you never could do anything without somebody's mother feeling that she was your mother as well. And so Joe, Jean, Betty, Rose, Carol, and I grew up, we later called us, somewhere around in 5th or 6th grade, we formed a group called the Five Funny Freaks, and our motto was, God helps those who help themselves over a candy counter. So it was this very warm, loving, kind of a fairy tale childhood that we all shared together, and everyone had done pretty well financially, and we went to this amazing school that had a telescope, and we went on nature walks, lots of nature walks, and it's funny, I guess this is really so formative for me. Our principal was named Mr. Smith, and I remember my sister coming back from college or going for a job in Washington, and she said, you know what counted most? That I'd gone to Elm Place High School. But my college years weren't as important as that I'd gone to that high school. It was a school where you learned by doing. We never learned the math tables or anything. We had a store. We made change, and we did a lot of things with our hands, and the girls and the boys took woodworking. We didn't have any home ec. I'm severely deficient in home ec, and I think my family has starved. My mother didn't know how to cook, my grandmother didn't know how to cook, and I can only just throw something together. And we were not taught the womanly arts. My mother taught me embroidery, but I never learned how to sew on a button, hem a skirt. And I think this school was it was through kindergarten through 8th grade. And we all went to nursery school together. And one year we had our 50th nursery school reunion. And so it was this very close. It has its downside. I mean, if you learn that you better get along. And at times when I didn't, I felt it. And we were all kind of, the families were all Christian except for mine, which was Jewish, but none of us ever went. I sang in the Episcopal choir because I liked that, and but none of us had the usual molding of religion. Our parents were all in a group together that lasted for hundreds of years, I think. It didn't have a name, at least I didn't know it. But they had dinner together one Sunday night a month, and they had a University of Chicago professor come out and talk about comparative religions. This is going in places I didn't know it was going to go.
No, that's fine, trust me.
And then when we were in, I guess our freshman year in high school, it developed into a group of kids we met one Sunday night a month and had a young student from Meadville Theological Seminary come out and talk to us, and then we had dinner. And just to tie my life together, when we came here to Tulsa, we became friends with the Unitarian minister, Bob Sonnen, and his wife, Olive. And one night we were over there to dinner, and Bob was telling about his studies at Meadville, and he said he was always hungry. He said, I just never had enough money to fill myself up. But I went to this group of really dumb kids who had no interest in this at all, but they had a Sunday night meeting, and I would come and talk to them. And then I'd have dinner with them, and we had this wonderful dinner, and they would load me up with food that would last me for a week. I said, oh, Bob, that's funny. I belong to a group like that. And we had this very dull guy come out, and we were all pretty good students, and we just didn't think he ever cut it. And suddenly we realized
it was him?
And he said, but you were all so ignorant. I said, let me just tell you about what happened. Carol Binder's foreign editor of the Chicago Daily News. Lenny Reeser's editor of the Atomic Research Bulletin. And I began telling him what happened to these kids that were so dumb. And I said, and here you are, the most wonderful minister I could possibly imagine.
It's a small world.
It is a small world. So it was funny, but our parents were very eager that we have a broad view of religion, I guess, because we must have had it. I think we all had very strong moral senses. I can remember many instances when particularly Joe Lloyd and I said, we won't do that. Prissy little prim pots. But I think we all had this strong feeling of this is what you do and this is what you don't do. Very old-fashioned nowadays.
Mm-hmm. Were your parents very encouraging when it came to education?
Oh, yes, there was no question. I was going to go to an Eastern Women's College. And my older sister was very boy crazy in high school, so she was immediately yanked out of high school and sent to a private girls' school as a day student. But she did not do particularly well, and she did not get into one of the right colleges. And I often wonder how much my sister's example. I adored my sister till I was about 10, I guess, and then I began thinking, what's she doing? She's plucking her eyebrows and wearing lipstick and failing English. And it was Prohibition times, and she had a little hip flask.
Wow.
And I really disapproved of her. And I think it was a wonderful influence. I didn't study hard, but I got good grades.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, in my high school, but the high school wasn't a very good high school. It had a wonderful vocational school, because Highland Park was kind of a little oasis of college-bound people in other suburbs that were more craft and skill-bound.
Mm-hmm.
And our high school built a house every year, and they learned to do the electric work, the carpentry work, the painting. It was really a good school for them. Very high. I didn't realize this till I went to a reunion. We were about 55% Italian, first generation. But we, in our little own world, were in a private session, and we went to our college-bound classes, which no one else was in. It was a very strange world. As I look back at it, our fathers all commuted and went into Chicago to work. And I guess it was, I now realize it was very odd, singular, but wonderfully nourishing to me.
What were some of your favorite subjects?
I adored math. I was really good at math. And in high school, Latin was by far my favorite subject. Our Latin teacher was just extraordinary, and our junior year, I actually was sent to another high school out of the district my freshman and sophomore years because they felt Highland Park High was not good, judging from my sister's performance there. And they did not want me to get into that route. And I didn't know anyone, and it was a huge school, and here I'd been brought up with this tiny circle, and I was not very well prepared to stretch out. And my parents took my sister to Europe because she was getting in trouble, and they wanted to get her out of the country. And
that's a good punishment.
Yeah, well, my mother was a Montessori teacher, and so I went to New Trier well, I'll tell you, I went 3 days to Catholic high school and decided that was not for me. And my mother had left a message that if I did want to change, we had someone living with us and taking care of us, I could go to New Trier. So I went to New Trier, but I had no tests, and I didn't realize it was a school where it was, I forget the word to use, you're classed, you're leveled. And so I started in the slightly retarded level. They were called X classes. I didn't know what X meant. But I thought these were pretty dumb classes. And then within 3 or 4 days, I was put in the normal. And then I was put in the accelerated. And then they decided to give me a test, and they put me in the experimental. So that within 3 weeks, I'd been in. And I wonder, looking back, how chaotic this was. And it was probably pretty good for me. But it didn't feel it at the time. Because as soon as I kind of tentatively started talking to someone, I was in another class. And, but then my father was on the stock exchange. He's not a broker, but he invested his own money. And this was very good for me. Very good. I'm always glad about it. We lived very, very well. We had a great big house. But sometimes we were really poor. Mm-hmm. And we had to really watch. I remember having dreams about getting stockings that didn't have snags and runs in them. And being able to buy clothes instead of wearing hand-me-downs from my cousin in St. Louis. And yet we lived pretty grandly, but all these little pinching economies mm-hmm. at home. And my mother was usually home in the afternoons and when we came home from school. And we would have tea and sew and talk. And I remember one time she took Vogue, and she'd just been looking at Vogue, and she said, "Now look at this woman. Look at these women. They all have the finest clothes, the most stylish clothes you can imagine. Look at their mouths. They're all turned down. These are not happy women. It's not clothes and money that's going to make you happy." I mean, I can remember it word for word. And so we were brought up with material goods, but with a pretty strong ethic that is not what counts. And so that I remember when our son was growing up and he wanted to go to Orbax here, and he could only buy clothes at Orbax, of course. And Raymond's brother had a kind of a store like Penny's in Kansas. And I said, if you have really good taste, you can go to Uncle Herman's and pick out clothes and look just like you would from Orbax, unless you're so dependent on a label. And so I think that was a pretty strong message in my childhood. Anyway, me and my friends all got through and kept these very strong, very supportive, most of the time, friendships, unless Joe and I were being too prissy.
Well, that's a great support system through the years, I'm sure.
It is. In fact, I'm opening mail because we were gone for so long. I got one from my OLF, my oldest living friend, Janie Selfridge. Well, Janie's mother and my mother lived across the street from each other in Chicago. And I think this must have happened when they were wheeling us in buggies. They'd meet on the street. Slim Selfridge, Slim Adams then, my oldest living friend. Irene Kessner, my oldest living friend. And they went on for years. Ended up in the hospital together, still being oldest living friends. And Janie and I was like, isn't this awful? Isn't this disgusting? And then one time we were meeting in Washington, and I could see her coming from all a distance. Janie, my oldest living friend, she was saying the same thing. And we are oldest living friends. Our mothers were pregnant together, and it's just so odd that all of these people who were in college together proceeded to have little girls my age. No little boys, which was pretty bad.
Well, when you were growing up outside of school, what did you like to do for fun?
Well, I loved Girl Scouts.
Mm.
I was a brownie, and then it was Depression time, and my mother and one of her friends just they couldn't raise the money to have a Girl Scout professional, so they did it. They worked it full time between them, and they ran Girl Scouting in the Moraine Council Girl Scouts. And I loved Girl Scouting, and it was a big influence on me, and it taught me whatever I knew how to cook was from Girl Scouts. And I went to Girl Scout camp, and then when I went to a private Girl Scout camp later, I didn't think it was nearly as much fun because everything was done for you, whereas we were doing it ourselves. And so Girl Scouts was a big influence. I was very athletic. My sister was a super athlete, and my parents were pretty athletic. We belonged to a country club, and then we swam, and we ice skated every afternoon. We sledded. We went bobsledding at night. We had a big wooden bobsled that you pulled behind a car. And we were expected to be good sports. If you hurt yourself, you did not cry. and oddly enough, partly because the man who taught diving at our club, swimming and diving at our club, was, I thought, pretty attractive. And so I was over there practicing diving all the time, and he entered me in a competition, and I won. And then I won AAU, and then he said, "You're off for the Olympics," and I really thought I was. And it was 1934. No, it was 1937, I guess. And I worked hard at it. I'm good at taking orders, particularly from a very cute young man. And if he said to do something, I did it. So I was learning gainers. Do you know what a gainer is?
I do not.
You walk on a board forward like this, jump, and then go back instead of going forward.
Okay.
And he said, "You're way out." I was on a 10-foot board, 3-meter board, and he said, "You've got to feel like you're going to hit the board." So I hit the board. And I went hurtling into the pool. And he said, "Get back up there." And I did. I'd broken my back.
Oh my goodness.
No more Olympics. That was 38 because...
How old were you?
39. I was 16.
And you broke your back at 16?
Yeah.
Oh.
But then it was really kind of one of those good things because I was always torn. Was I going to be a scholar?
Mm-hmm.
Or was I going to be an athlete? You could not do both. And I was wobbling. And I got into every college I applied to. I didn't realize it. I'm not such a secure child. I came home and there was, on April 15th, were all these big fat letters from Vassar Smith, Wellesley, Bryn Mawr, and Radcliffe. And I sat on the floor and cried. I said, "They've sent back everything I've sent to them." And my mother said, "Why don't you open one?" And I had been admitted. And I would never describe myself as secure. And yet, when I look back, I think I must have been more secure than I thought I was. I think I had that usual adolescent. I was not a pretty girl, and I wasn't cute. And with boys, I always had a date, but it wasn't one of the glamour boys. uh, and it wasn't 3 months ahead. And so it was, but the back thing made it very easy. I was not going to be able to be a diver.
Mm-hmm.
So then I was going to have to be a scholar.
Well, you got these letters from all these different colleges. Where did you end up going?
I ended up going to Vassar. My mother had 2 cousins that were like sisters to her. She did not have a sister. And they had both gone to Vassar. And my parents took me east, and we went and looked at all the colleges before this, before I applied. And they all looked wonderful to me. And they all are.
Mm-hmm.
But I think I went there because my cousin Dorothy went there. And
what was that experience like for you?
it was very strange. I came from a public school, and I was going east to school. I was a Jewish girl with no Jewish background and not used to being discriminated against. And I was given a Jewish roommate, whom I did not know, who was raised completely differently from me, and was very, her first question was, I didn't know what she meant, so I'll say it the way she said it to me, "What kind of a chubby do you have?" And I said, "What's a chubby?" And she said, "A fur coat, a short fur coat." And I was so offended, I said, "None." In those days, every girl had one, and I did. But I was so put off by this. This was her first question to me. Not, "What are you majoring in?" or "Where do you come from?" "What kind of a chubby do you have?" So pretty early into the semester, she found another roommate. Moved out. We had a 3-room suite for 2, so I had it for myself. But I felt very discarded, even though I didn't like her, and we didn't fit together at all. I felt pretty dumped.
Mm-hmm.
Luckily, I got to know the other girls on my floor, and we had a very good. But I felt insecure a lot of the time. Girls would say, "Where did you prepare?" I went to Highland Park High School, you know, and a lot of them knew each other. I knew one girl, but I didn't realize it for a couple of months, and we ran into each other on campus. I'd gone to camp with her, and it was hard. I started going to chapel very regularly. I loved singing in the choir. I went to everything there was on the campus. I went to every lecture and concert, art show, and I'll tell you that when we graduated, the teachers did a takeoff on us. Am I rambling?
No, you're fine.
And the teacher who wore my clothes and was me drew great hilarity. All she did was walk across the stage carrying a pile of books, because I never studied. In high school, I never studied. In English class, we were given an assignment. I'd write it in class, and handed it in, and I just thought, I don't need to do this. Well, at Vassar, I found at the end of the first semester that I had a C- average, and I was going to be asked to leave, and I was asked to keep a time chart of every 15 minutes in a day. And we were supposed to do 2 hours of home study for every hour in class, which would have been 45 hours a week, including your class and your 2 hours. You know, I was doing like 17, but loving it. I was just agog with all of this stuff going on, and but I had to trim my sails and really study, and I just adored it. I you know, in my next life, I think I want to be a researcher, and I just adored it. I love spending time in the library and getting into things, and I had extraordinarily good teachers, I think, who, and I can look back on certain incidents that happened. For example, reading Virginia Woolf's Two Guineas about women, a room of one's own. That just refocused me. I mean, really big time. And I have probably the only total collection of Virginia Woolf first editions, simply because that's what I could buy at the time. I wasn't looking for first editions. I just bought everything Virginia Woolf wrote. And have you read Virginia Woolf?
I have.
It just threw me into something else. And I can also remember my history teacher, a little old lady, just very politely chewing me out in class. And I must have just looked devastated. And she said, "Miss Goodman, he whom the Lord loveth, he chastiseth." And I became a really good student because I loved it. But those teachers wangled me into it.
What was your major?
I started out majoring in music, and I thought I was going to be a great composer. I did not want to be a pianist or a violinist, and I realized I wasn't that good, but I was pretty good. Well, being there with real competition, I realized I didn't have it. At the same time, I realized that I adored economics. I adored psychology. I adored sociology. I'm going to leave music. And it was one of those easy transitions. If there's a new thought for me. If I were to say I have a gift, I think it's flexibility. I can go from being a diver. I can go from being a musician. And that may be that I give up too quickly on other things. I mean, that same flexibility is a two-way street. I maybe don't persevere and work as hard as I could on things. But I feel pretty passionate about changing the world. And I feel as though moving to Tulsa gave me an opportunity that I would never have had in a big city like Chicago, to see a problem, get a little group around it, and get something done.
Give me some examples.
Okay. Well, my most recent is getting arts back into the public schools. I was chairing a national meeting on aesthetics and education. I came home from the meeting thinking, we don't have that in Tulsa. We took 2 of our children out of public school because we felt they were getting such a poor education. And without much thought, I went to the phone, called the superintendent, who at that time was named, I can't think of it, John, our first black superintendent. And we met him at a couple of parties, and I called for an appointment, and his secretary said, well, you can have 15 minutes on such and such a date. It was about 2 or 3 days from there. So I worked really hard on pulling together a really convincing presentation of why the arts made a difference to all children in a public school, and that the impact on low-income children was probably higher than it was on high-income, high-achieving children, because they already had that partially in their lives. And that for children who didn't come from an academic background, to have something that relieved them during school that they could be good on was probably the most important thing possible. So I had this really cogent speech on why. And he said, I know all that, now what are we going to do about it? I had not prepared that part at all. And he really was for it. And I had this 15-minute appointment. 2 hours later, I walked out of there, chairman of a task force. We had put together, I'd gotten his agreement that his secretaries would do all the scat work, get the letters out. I'll set up the meetings, but I don't want to do typing, and it was before emails, and I don't want to spend my time on the phone. And we had a really good committee, and then I went over to the Arts and Humanities Council, and I was on the board, and Wendy Thomas was the director, and I said, now Wendy, I've taken this on, and this is really an Arts and Humanities Council job, and I want you to take it on with me. You have my total support. So, I mean, now we have 55 elementary schools with music and art. It changed, and it was just a series of the most amazing, unexpected things. Like, that was probably in October. We got some really good people. We set up a little steering committee, but we had a big committee, and they were all interested. But I called on every single school board member, and every single one was for it. But how can we do it? We don't have any money, but we're for it. And I went to the Tribune and the World and met with the editorial boards. And I heard about how they played saxophone into the Sand Springs Band, and everybody was for it, but how do you get it done? And we went to a lot of Christmas parties that year, but the first one was given by BOK at Southern Hills, and Eugene Swearingen came up to me and said, Nancy, that's the most wonderful thing you're doing, and I want to see what I can do to help. I said, oh, Gene, that's wonderful. You've been president of BOK, president of TU. Let me figure out how to put you in. Then somebody else came up. I took some napkins. I started writing people's names down. And by the end of the evening, I had 200 of the most powerful people in Tulsa. Then I went to all arts boards. So we had the power of Tulsa behind us for the first time, and we came up with, and John said, I want you to have this by January 1st. So we worked on it, got a very slick thing put together, the schools put it together. We had such incredible, this must have been the next year, we had such incredible cooperation. Only a few South Side schools had art, none of the North Side schools, plus which none of the North Side principals wanted it because they said, we have to concentrate on reading and math.
Yeah.
And everything extra we have, we put in on music and on math and reading, particularly reading. And I said, but you're not getting it done. Well, if we just had more time or another system. I said, all this research proves that the arts help children learn. They learn in different ways. I went to Reuben Gant, who was the president of the North Tulsa Chamber of Commerce. Reuben got it quickly. And I said, okay, now what are you going to do about those principals? He said, I don't know. And here we had a black superintendent of schools. Well, he was a funny man. We got along really well, really well. I wrote all his speeches. I did all his letters. I spoke to the principals for him. The school board went along with it 100%, and we got it done. Now, you can't do that in a city like Chicago.
Have you been able to go into the classroom and see the efforts of these students?
Ann Tomlins, who's the new superintendent of art, brought this over to me, and she said, this is what you did.
That's great.
So there are a lot of examples. The first thing I did was worked with the League of, I like to work with a group. I work very, very hard, but I want to work with a group. I feel I'm not a sole worker. I get very buoyed up by a group and get lots of ideas from a group, and maybe it goes back to my little group of 5 funny freaks. I've always worked in a group or in a family. And then I have the most supportive husband in the world. The first thing was when I came here through the League of Women Voters, I was local government chair. And I found out that the health department was absolutely horrible. And the county had a health department that was absolutely horrible. And I did a lot of study on it. And of course the obvious thing was, why not put them together? And that year, for the League, I worked up a series of charts showing where we were. Our milk was not inspected properly. I could go into this in horrible detail because it's all vivid to me. Meadow Gold at the time used to say I was paid by my uncle who owned Hawk's Dairy. I did not have an uncle. but Meadow Gold was uncertified milk. And here was a city in the 20th century without dates on the bottles, and we had all kinds of things. And I made charts, and I went around and I did 97 speeches in Tulsa on the city health department and how it had to be put together with the county health department, and the Chamber of Commerce got interested. Chamber of Commerce got interested in that education thing. After first saying, no, this is not our area, they got, I mean, we had 100%, and I like working that way.
Now, the milk was in the 40s, right?
In the 40s.
Okay.
And we were married in 46, and this was all done by 50. And that was the first thing. It was a very empowering thing to do. I mean, I got it done. And it got, our mayor at the time was named Lee Price. And we'd go to so many dinners together. And I knew that he didn't like peas, and he knew that I didn't like bread. He'd just pass his peas and pass my bread back. And you know, I think you can get so much done when you. This is a very cooperative community. They like to work together, and it's a progressive community. It's not a liberal community, but it's a progressive community. And so in the field of health, I also put together, much later through the Community Service Council, always there's somebody that I rely on. But I'm a hard worker. I like working. I've got energy, and I like using it. And I like interacting with people. So I've just done a lot of different things. Oh, the other thing was we had horrible maternal mortality statistics in Tulsa. We now have the best in the state by far, although it is slipping. We put together a coalition called the Perinatal Coalition. I decided, Raymond asked me what I wanted for my birthday one year, and I said, I want no woman to have more than a 2-week waiting period before she can see a doctor, whether she has any money or not.
Did he deliver?
He did. And I really copied that from my friend Joan Flint, who, when Bill asked her what she wanted for her birthday one year, brought a speaker here that was absolutely marvelous. And I may think of his name even. He was very well known. And I disagreed with him. He was the idea in a public meeting, and I raised my hand, and Bill Flynn said to me, driving him to the airport, he said, who was that lady in the hat who asked me that question? She's right, you know. And so I got the idea of a birthday present from Joan. But it's been a very, very enriching experience to me to be able to work on these things, to be able to see results, to pull a variety of people together.
And you've done a lot in Tulsa, really.
Well, yeah, I've been here a long time. I'm 85 years old.
Well, we're gonna get back to a few of the things you did a little bit later, because I made a list. But I want to get back to something you were mentioning during your days at Vassar. What did you end up majoring in?
Well, I ended up with my father losing a heck of a lot of money and not being able to send me back my junior year.
Okay.
And yet I wasn't eligible for a scholarship. And so I was still majoring in music, but taking very little of it, and taking lots of econ and psychology. And I went, and what my father said is, I don't want you to come out of college without knowing that you're going to be able to do something. And I'm not sure we'll be able to get a master's degree for you. And we think, your mother and I, that I forgot to tell you something important. When I transferred to Highland Park High School, my second semester, my junior year, I was going to Highland Park High School, and I was not studying at all, and I was making straight A's. And I came home one afternoon and said, "Oh, it's so boring, I can't stand it." And my mother said, "I know, and you won't have to, because I've had all your classes transferred to the morning, and you're going to Northwestern University in the afternoon." I am. I tell you, I can't believe how obedient I was, but I knew that this was right. So I'd gone to Northwestern sometimes in the summer and taken music courses. And so I began at Northwestern, and I was taking music courses, and then I took an English course, and then when my father said, "You have to come home from Vassar and go to Northwestern," I found I had over a year of courses at Northwestern already, and I wasn't a junior, I was a senior.
Wow.
And I'd taken a few extra courses at Vassar too, but I couldn't take extra courses there. That was hard stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But Northwestern was easy, and I didn't like it at all. And
Did you live at home during
I lived
that time?
at home.
Mm-hmm.
That was part of it. I was not used to living at home and obeying and being sweet, good, and darling. So Christmas time, I said, I just hate Northwestern. And my brother-in-law, who had gone to the University of Chicago Law School, said, "You know, we were all sitting around Christmas tree at one end of the room, and stockings still hung up." And my brother-in-law said, "You know, Nancy, I always thought you'd be a wonderful lawyer. And the law school at Chicago is so sociologically oriented and so psychologically oriented. You would really like that." And my father said, "What a great idea." And my brother fell asleep on the couch, and by the time he woke up, it was all set that I was to go out and interview at the law school with my mommy and see if I could get into the law school. And it was a cold, snowy day. We took the train in. It was wartime, and no gas, and went to the law school. And I didn't see how inappropriate it was for a girl to be, first of all, for a girl to go to law school. It never occurred to me this was not really done, and certainly not to bring your mother with you. And I remember the admissions officer saying, "Mrs. Goodman, I want to hear from your daughter." And I thought, but anyway, I got into the law school on the basis of my crazy record of Northwestern and Vassar.
Huh.
I ended up with very good grades and on the Dean's Honor Roll at Vassar. And so suddenly I was in a course that would be a 4-year law school course. And it would include law and the nature of man, moral and political philosophy, all kinds of things that were my kind of thing. And I didn't care about this law stuff. I knew so little. And I was starting in the second, it was a quarter system. I was starting in the second quarter. And there were four other girls in the whole law school.
Not a lot.
Not a lot. It was wartime, and there were not a lot of men in there. The law school was small, which is probably why I got in so easily like that. And but I was just fascinated. But there were things I didn't understand, like why were all the judges either named CHJ, Charles James, or Charles John, or just J? I never thought of Justice and Chief Justice. I mean, why were they always in trial court? When were they going to get to the real court? I mean, dumb? I was so ignorant. And in my contracts class, there was another woman in my class, Miss Green. She didn't last long. But our professor always used her as an example, and he said, Miss Green versus the flagpole. So I was looking for this case. I didn't know. And the women in law school were, except for Boots Green, who dropped out. She was very cute. Were pretty grim. They wore neckties and vests and good, solid shoes. And they didn't like me. And they didn't talk to me. And there was one other girl in the law school named Jewel Stratford, whose father originally came from Tulsa, and a black lawyer who left during the time of the race riot. And Jewel and I became really very, very close friends. She was absolutely beautiful and smart and sweet and everything good. Well, these three girls, if we walked into the ladies' room, there was a big room there that you could sit and talk. Conversation stopped. And we would say, why don't they like us? We spent hours talking about why women's unity had not come into play. And why didn't they like us? What was the matter? They were never nice to us. They never said, sit down and talk or anything. And Jewel said, it's because I'm black. I'm a Negro is the term. And I said, Jewel, why don't they like me? And she said, because you're my best friend. And so it went on, and we talked about this. And they were never nice to us at all. In 1968, Jewel and I roomed together. She was head of the Illinois Commission on Civil Rights, and I was head of the Oklahoma Committee on Civil Rights. So we were going to this convention together, and what fun we could be together again. So we went back to our same old topic of conversation, and I said, there they would sit in those man-tailored suits and those neck. Oh! Neither of us. We were both so innocent. We had never thought. I don't think I'd ever heard of a lesbian. But they were all lesbian and felt very threatened by us. But it had a very interesting effect upon me. I did not want to be that kind of a lawyer. I did not want to stride into a law school, a law court, and pretend to be a man. And men were being drafted, and I began a tradition at law school that everyone should give me, when they left for the Army, they should give me a shirt. And I would have ruffles put on it and wear it. And I always wore high heels and stockings, and I walked 3/4 of a mile to school in my high heels and stockings. And when a professor once asked me, and this was in my freshman year, he said, "Miss Goodman, why are you in law school?" I said, "I want to sway the jury with my hips." Well, I think I told you, I'd always been maybe averagely popular, or a little sub-averagely popular with boys. Sub-averagely, I would say. Suddenly, I was the most popular thing in the world. I was so feminine, and I was so adorable, and I was so stupid, and I was dated up months ahead, and I was sent flowers, and my roommate Arlene and I would make up these things that I would say, like, "These books are so heavy, would you carry some?" And I lost all respect for these dumb guys. What was the matter with them? Here I was, this perfectly wonderful person whom they never noticed until I acted like a fool, and then and I was really disgusted. I had marriage proposals. It was awful. And
Well, how did you meet your husband?
well, he was in law school too, and a mutual friend of ours invited us to a party we had to walk to down at the beach. And when she called me, I said, "Isn't there someone else I could go with?" And she said, "What makes you say that?" And I said, "He's so nice, but he's so uninteresting as a man. He's just not at all interesting." And she said, "Do you think so?" "Well, no one else does." And she said, "But it's funny, he said he didn't want to take you either." Well, he said, "But I'm just inviting my close friends, and you got to go with him." Well, on the way over, I started my silly talk, and he said, "You can cut that stuff with me." We danced together that night, and I thought, oh my God, I had never felt that way before. And we had a big law school picnic, and I was president of the Junior Bar Association. Of course, all those boys went out and voted for me because I was so dumb. And we rented a cabin, and it turned out there was a huge snowstorm, and we had to stay overnight. And the boys had brought dates, and girls were having hysterics, and the place was used by the Boy Scouts beforehand, and they'd left syrup all over all the dishes. Raymond and I washed all the dishes, calmed the girls, got the garbage detail going, and we came home from that, and we both lived at International House on the boys' and girls' side, which was strictly observed, I think, and we went in for some ice cream, and he said, "I did not want to take you to this. I knew I would fall in love with you, and I did not want to." And that was it. We started talking and talking. I had another boyfriend that was fairly serious, and we just talked and talked, and I was such a goody-goody. We occasionally held hands, and we come from very, very different backgrounds. He comes from Orthodox Jewish family, and they didn't think much of my family, and my family didn't think much of them.
Was he from?
Tulsa.
Okay.
And my father certainly didn't like the idea of my going to live in Tulsa, which he called the cultural oasis of Oklahoma.
What?
And but nobody opposed it. It just wasn't an enthusiastic process.
What year did you graduate from?
Law school,
Mm-hmm.
January of '46, and we got married in March. He graduated he'd been in the Army and was discharged medically and came back to school. Went back to OU, and OU wasn't as good as it had been. He was looking for something else, and he looked at Harvard, Yale, and Chicago had the best summer program for him, so he went. And I remember he walked into the library, and I was working in the library, and I thought, well, here's another new slob. But it's been wonderful. Just
How did you get to Tulsa?
how did what?
How did you get to Tulsa?
Well, he wanted to live here, and I did not. And so, well, the proposal was a pretty wonderful thing. My parents insisted that I visit his parents and see what they were like. Sure that would turn me off, and it almost did. But it was over Halloween, and one night we came home from some party, and I said, I just cannot live in a segregated community. I find this so offensive. I cannot live here. I mean, we've been talking about marriage for months, but I can't live here. He said, well, marry me and desegregate it. So that was one of the first things I did. We had black friends from the beginning, and we worked on getting several organizations we were in to bid blacks for the first time, the League of Women Voters, and Raymond belonged to a thing called the American Veterans Committee, which admitted blacks, whereas the others didn't. And I went on the board of the NAACP here, and I was the only woman and the only white. And a nice, funny, small world thing. Dr. Norval Coots was a very prominent black physician here, and his wife, I met her at something, and we looked at each other, and she said, did you go to Northwestern in the summer program in the music school in 1943? And I said, yeah. She said, look at me, do you remember me? I said, oh, do I remember you? I was 15, and I had a white dress on. I was asked to go to the blackboard, and I started menstruating. And she came up behind me and took me out, got me cleaned up, and here we were back in Tulsa on opposite sides of town, and she and I did sit-ins at Utica Square, at any place, at the Mayo Hotel. So she was gorgeous. Gladys was a great beauty, very smart, and
Were you ever arrested?
no, but we sat at what is now the Wild Fork for 2 hours without being waited on, and right in the window. But I'd done this in Chicago too. I'd done it at the Blackstone Hotel and the Drake Hotel. This was part of my growing up, that You did not discriminate at all. And I think my parents followed it pretty well. They didn't have black friends, but a black speaker would come to town and they would be entertaining him.
Mm-hmm.
And I had some skin problems, and Mother took me to a black physician way on the other side. I mean, we lived north, 25 miles north of Chicago. She took me to a black physician on the south side of Chicago. And I'm sure it was just... It's interesting as I think about my mother, and I've been thinking about her more and more. My father seemed to be the dominant influence in my life. We were very much alike. He was more dynamic, very brilliant, very exciting man to be with. So I identified with him, and I thought my mother was the lovely homemaker who ran a very good home and did all these lovely volunteer jobs. But as I look back at it, who was getting me to go to Northwestern? Who was sending me to New Trier?
She had a plan.
She had a plan, and
it was kind of covert.
and I didn't realize how. Well, Raymond always says, you always underestimated your mother. I loved her dearly. She was most lovable, and she was very capable. But his highest compliment to me is, that's like your mother.
Wow. So you're a newly minted lawyer in Tulsa.
Yes.
Can you find a job?
Could not find a job. I was editor of the Law Review. I had very good grades. How fast do you type? I don't type at all. Well, how did you get through law school? In those days, nobody typed. And I said, well, I had a secretary because I was editor of the Law Review. Well, here were some of the answers. I might just put you on and we could have dinner and talk about cases at night. Why would you want to do that? I mean, sometimes I'm not quite bright, maybe very often. And I got all these weird offers. And I would tell Raymond, and he'd say, don't you understand? But no one had ever treated me that way.
Did you want to work in law?
Oh, yes.
Mm-hmm.
I never thought of anything else. And one day I got turned down. Oh, I got turned down so much. And there were 4 lawyers, women lawyers here, all of whom had gone to night law school and typed. And when I was going to take the bar, they took me out to lunch and told me I should type my bar exam because they had worked so hard to get it possible to be able to type your bar exam. And I said, well, I don't know how to type. We'll teach you. I said, I've got to learn about Oklahoma law, not about typing. I also had to learn not to be so offensive. But I got turned down by everything. And finally, I walked out to TU. I was furious. It was 109 on the first national clock. And I walked out to TU and I said, what could I teach? What could I teach? Either psychology or sociology. And I called the sociology department, walked in there, met this man, Dr. Kovacs. Now, you have to remember, this was just immediate post-war. Nobody had been, no men had been in universities for years. And there were a huge number of people coming back. He said, I'll give you a start. he said, you'll have to talk to John Rogers, who's the head of personnel and for the board. So I went to talk to John Rogers. The law school is named after him, our John Rogers Law School. And I'd also applied for a place at the juvenile court. And we talked a little bit, and then he said, okay, Nancy, you and I are on the same length. You interrupt me, I'll interrupt you. We know what we're saying. Let's just move this along. And so we were just going, okay. Then he said, now, Nancy, you can choose whichever one you want. I would advise you to take the TU position, and I'll arrange for it immediately. and that was it.
And you spent how long at TU?
37 years.
Wow.
And a part-time, I went to full-time. And I adored it. It was everything I wanted. And when we had children, I could be home by 3 o'clock. And I thought, why did I ever think I wanted to practice law?
What were some of the classes you taught?
Well, of course, in the beginning, I taught introductory sociology, and I went down to the library and studied everything I could about introductory sociology and social problems. Then I taught an introduction to social work, which I had a lot of background on. When I was in law school, my father was a Hull House boy. Have you ever heard of Hull House? It was a settlement house in Chicago for poor kids. And it had a huge influence on him. Miss Jane Addams, who started it, he was on the board of trustees later on. And Miss Addams, I read everything that she wrote, and I knew her well. And the drama teacher there, and my father had wanted to be an actor and was in all the plays, and she used to come to our house almost every Sunday, as I can recall, and we'd go out on trips together and picnics, and Miss Nan Creed was with us so much. And when I went to the University of Chicago, they had a very distinguished faculty, most of whom had studied at Hull House or had been connected with it. And Miss Abbott called me up and she said, Nancy Goodman, what are you doing in law school? You should be in the School of Social Work, SSA, Social Service Administration. And I thought, oh, but I'm loving law school. She said, well, you'll have to take a course from me. So I sat in on a lot of courses in SSA from probably the most outstanding teachers in the country, all of whom knew my father. And then, my life is full of serendipity. I had a friend whose father was, without question, the most distinguished urban sociologist in the country. She wanted to live on campus. No, she couldn't live on campus because it was too expensive, but she was allowed to invite someone to live with her at home. She invited me. And Mr. Worth taught urban sociology on Thursday nights at home. And I sat in on it. And I was fascinated by urban sociology. And this was a master's degree class. But I decided to write the paper for the class because I was so charged. And I wrote the paper. And he called me up and he said, Nancy, would it embarrass you if I read your paper? And I said, to the whole class? And he said, yes. I said, I think it would. Maybe I won't come. He said, no, I want you there. So I went. By that time I was no longer living there. Nancy had gotten into it. And she was a Nancy too. Anyway, he read my paper and he said, this is the best paper I got. So the whole thing meant sociology. I was, my whole background, my father's connection with Hull House, my mother setting up free breakfasts at the elementary school for children, and everything in my background led to it. And then I told my great lie. I was teaching a class in social work, and I had Jane Addams' book, and the frontispiece has a little girl, I've got the picture downstairs, with long curls and high lace shoes. And I said, and this is me with Miss Addams. Why did I say that? I have lied to my class. I have lied. I didn't say that to them. I went home thinking, this is terrible. How could I have done this? And we had a Goodman family reunion in California. And one of my cousins said to me, you know, Nancy, I have that original picture of you and Miss Addams. I was 3 years old.
Wow.
And I must have...
How about that? Channeling it.
But I thought for 6 months that I had told a real puffing lie.
Do you have any other moments from the classroom that really stick out for you?
Oh, I have lots. I adored teaching. I really did. I'd be so pumped up after teaching. I did a lot of acting in teaching. I'm not my father's daughter for nothing. And yeah, I have students that I remember so well and whom I still see. Like Jim Inhofe, our esteemed senator's sister, Marilyn, still is one of my favorite students. She was brilliant and beautiful and charming, and we disagree on everything, but we're good friends. And I had so many wonderful students, and I really connected with them. But I'll tell you a funny one. I was teaching a course in group work, in the social work side of it, and I had mostly athletes. And the school was full, and there was a little room over the bookstore, and I was assigned to that room. And I walked in. I was 23 when I started teaching. I was probably 25 then. And I looked around. There was no desk. It was just kind of a collection of chairs and tables, and I didn't know where I was going to stand. And one of the students said, "Oh, just sit down over there. I'm going to lecture from here." So I sat down, and then when it time to start with the class, I said, "Now I'll start lecturing." Well, the poor guy was so embarrassed, but he turned out to be one of the great. I've mothered through a lot of the wonderful social workers in Tulsa. He ended up at the juvenile court, and I cannot think of anything more satisfying than teaching and feeling that you have influenced people to go into a field that you think is important. So I adored teaching. I used to say that I was the highest paid grader around, because I taught free in my mind. I had to assign my whole salary to grading papers.
Well, it's amazing that while you were teaching, you were, like we spoke about earlier, you were doing all of these great things in the Tulsa community too.
Well, but you have to realize there wasn't the pressure there is now to do research and write.
Mm-hmm.
I like doing research, but I like doing it on problems here. And I did not write. I had 4 book contracts, and I never came through on any of them. I'm a talker. And I still have a big, thick manila folder in my file, and I call it Will I or Won't I? And it's all the things I want to write. And so as a writer, I'm a total failure.
There's
and I
still
like
time.
writing, but it's so alone.
It is. You have plenty. Well, I don't know. You're pretty busy. I don't know if you have plenty of time. I'd like to go back and talk about some of the things you've done in the Tulsa community.
Okay.
I read somewhere about You and the credit card company. Tell me about that.
Okay. Well, this is the women's rights in me. I don't think my mother was so women's rightsy, but she was highly respected by my father and was treated with great respect by everybody. And the first, I think it was the Bank America card, was the first credit card. And I couldn't get a credit card. And I was furious. So, was this in the newspaper?
I found it in a newspaper article, yes.
Huh. Well, I kept calling them, Bank America, and think, why can't I get a credit card? Your husband has a credit card. I said, why can't I get one? I want a credit card. No, I said, I'm going to England, and I'm going to be lecturing in England, and I've got to have my own credit. No. Well, then they called Raymond and said, your wife is making such fuss about a credit card that if you say it's okay, we'll give her one. He said, well, I won't. I think you should look at her income, look at her salary, and you decide whether you would give a person with that salary and that credit history a credit card. Well, they didn't. Well, we were in England. I was in England then, and the Barclay Bank was their correspondent. They gave me the credit card.
Around what time was this?
This must have been 1975, I would say.
And did you do a lot of international lecturing?
I did a fair amount. I was very lucky. There was a lecturer. My life is full of luck. It's a serendipitous life. There was a woman who was lecturing here for British American Associates, and I met her, and we just clicked and became good friends. And then I'd done something that got everybody angry about blacks. I forget what it was. But they talked to her about this and what I did, and she liked it. And I think I refused to go to Southern Hills. And I'm not quite sure what it was. And she liked it and called me up and said, I want to see you. I've got free time tomorrow. Could you have lunch? And I changed some things. We had lunch. And we talked and talked, and we just really liked each other. And she recommended that I be the next lecturer, because in alternate years, that same lecturer went from the United States to England. Mm-hmm. So I did that. And I did it twice. And she died 2 years ago, but we have been very, very close friends. She was a judge, and it was really interesting.
What a great opportunity.
Yeah, it was wonderful. So I did 2 years in England. Did that. While I was in England, the first time, an Indian man was a student at the University of Manchester, a graduate student there, and he came up to me after and he said, what can I do to get you to come lecture in India? I said, just set it up for me, I'd love it. And I gave him my name, he gave me his. Few days or week later, I was lecturing at the University of Birmingham. Another Indian came up, said exactly the same thing. So I gave him the other one's contact. They didn't know each other. And they put together a consortium of 18 different universities which sponsored me on a lecture trip in India. And let's see, where else have I been? Oh, I did a lecture trip in Egypt, and then, oddly enough, got one in Israel because of that. One led to another. And then I did it in Peru. Those are the major ones.
What would you lecture about?
Well, in England, it was to make Brits and Americans more aware of each other's cultures. And I lectured on, the first time, I did America's middle class, Middle West cities was one of them. It was a time when cities were being burned and there was all this to do, and I wanted to know that Omaha and Tulsa and Wichita were peaceful cities busy solving problems. And so that was one. The Indians in American life. Women, always women. I did both times, I invented a lecture that I did all over the world then. I got interested in communications, and I would seat people in front of an audience at a table, back to back. And they each had a table in front of them and a set of kindergarten blocks, exactly the same blocks. And I'd say, now, you're the leader. You tell what kind of a structure you're going to build, and she will follow you. And I would do it 3 ways. The first time, you just went through it. And then you looked at each other's, and of course, they were totally different. The second time, if you didn't understand what the leader was saying, you could go like this. And the leader would usually respond, I said to put the large rectangle on its side. They would get very, why am I being challenged? And it didn't come out. It came out a little better, but not, and the third time, they could say, I don't understand what you mean by this. And so it was early in the times when we were learning about communication. And I don't know how I came up with it. I refined it over a series of occasions, but it was incredibly popular, really all over the world. And most interesting, TU at that time had a huge number of Arab students in their petroleum engineering class. And I was teaching a class on the impact of technology on society that they had to take whether they wanted to or not. And so I would start out with this. And then they would say, well, that doesn't happen in Arabic. Arabic is perfectly clear. I said, well, okay, do it. Nothing is perfectly clear.
Mm-hmm.
So if it was just, I did it at junior leagues all over the country. I did it, I don't know how many times. And then I thought, I should write this up. I can't really stand the thought of it anymore. One thing about me is I'm not terribly disciplined. And I want to get it done, and I'm very impatient.
Now, you started a few nonprofit groups here in Tulsa. Tell me about the Tulsa Center for the Physically Limited.
Oh, yeah. I was, at that time, president of the Council of Jewish Women, which, like the Junior League, had as the mission of finding unmet needs in the community, pulling together a community group and fulfilling those needs. And by the time I became president, the group was fairly much falling apart, or they wouldn't have asked me because I don't fit the mold. And okay, I decided we really needed a good project. And so I spread it among the board that we had to find a project that Tulsa really needed and that was maybe unique. And Dorothy Whitebook was in San Francisco and saw a center for physically handicapped, as it was put, and came back with the idea. I investigated it a lot more. It wasn't exactly what I thought was the best thing because it wasn't as pushing them out into the community as I thought it was. But we brought the woman here. She stayed with us and gave a speech to a big group, again, group,
Mm-hmm.
cerebral palsy, every group that I could think of. And everybody thought, this is just what we need. These people are hidden away. And so the Council of Jewish Women voted to subsidize it for so it could be taken over by the community. And I chaired the steering committee to investigate feasibility. And it seemed to be that everybody thought that this was a really big need to get people out of their houses because they were just hidden away. And it turns out they really were. I would go up to I can remember names. I would go up to a house and say, do you have a son here named George? No. Well, it says you have a son named George. Who's a little bit handicapped, maybe? Well, yes. Would you be interested in having him come to a center where he could be with other people like him and spend a day and give you a little relief? Oh, yes. And, I mean, we pulled them out of attics.
Mm.
It was amazing. And Hillcrest Hospital, Council of Jewish Women had done a project for Hillcrest where they did diversion therapy for mentally ill people. And they had done that for years there. And so they had a lot of extra space. We could have it. So we started in there, and Council of Jewish Women paid for the salary of a full-time occupational therapist, which was a big mistake. We needed someone who was not interested in making you well, but who was interested in having you have fun. And we had all these volunteers, and it just boomed.
Well, another group that you were involved with was the Tulsa Global Alliance.
Oh yeah, that again wasn't my idea. Denny Cook came here, and we met her at a party at Josie and Tom Winters, and she was talking about what she had done in Washington, which was to work for the Global Alliance there, and how they brought people in. And Raymond and I, through a friend of mine, Rose Carroll, one of my five, whose husband was teaching at the University of Kansas, and she said, when we were still living in a little tiny one-room apartment, said that they took it, that we should be taking in foreign visitors and giving them a tour of the city and letting them know what life was like in Tulsa, and that they were doing it in Manhattan, Kansas, and wouldn't we do it? And so yes, we did it, and then we moved into our big house while we had them by the score. And so Denny said, well, you're just the person I need. We've got to get this started in Tulsa. Well, she didn't know anybody in Tulsa, but she knew all about what it should be like. So the two of us made the team, and it just went off. But everybody was so I remember Cenk Jones was the editor of our newspaper, and he was just so for it, and everybody was really good, and the chamber was for it. It was just, it was hard work. I like hard work.
I could see that. Well, you've done so many things. Can you go into detail about a key moment you consider one of your biggest highlights?
There's no question that for me the biggest highlight of my life was marrying Raymond Feldman. I know that sounds screwy, but it's just been the most, he's just right for me. Pushes me along but doesn't push, opens things up, supports, and we have such fun together, and I love him.
Well, going back to 1995, when you were notified that you were going to be inducted into the Oklahoma Women's Hall of Fame.
I couldn't believe it. I was just thrilled. I really was thrilled. I have been amazed at the honors given to me because I've not thought of myself as, well, my original 5 did not think of me as a great leader. And so I've never thought of myself as that. And it turns out that in our lives we've each turned out to be. And these awards, because people have hated me and think I'm doing the wrong thing, so that particularly about blacks or other things that are terrible, and so that the award kind of says, well, they do like me, it is okay.
Do you remember who presented you at the ceremony? And I'm not even sure if they did. I know the current ceremonies, they have somebody come up and they present the award.
Yeah, I forget. I can remember so much about it. My sister and brother-in-law came, and
did you have a lot of family and friends there? A lot of supporters?
Yeah. It's surprising. I don't always expect that, you know, and it was very reaffirming, because I think anybody who does things that are different, you get your share of the bumps,
mm-hmm.
and an award like this helps the bumps a lot. I remember maybe one of the first awards I got, I don't know, I think it was, I just got the invitation to the next meeting, but in 1973, Women in Communication awarded me, and I thought, why me? I was just so startled. And it's hard to think of yourself as one of these wonderful people who gets awards. You know, you don't go through life thinking this way. So it's.
Well, how do you feel that now people look at you as a role model?
I think I'm very lucky, and I want to be a good role model. And I want to tell them you can do things that are hard and nasty, and you don't always get kudos all along the way. There are people who dislike me. Now, how can they?
Why is that?
I think gardening is very nurturing to the soul. And we like beauty. We like to think of ourselves as being fairly non-material, but we like to live in a beautiful environment. And we like to work in the soil and like to work together. And then travel has been the other thing, which we could never have anticipated because we grew up in Depression and war.
Mm-hmm.
And who would have ever have thought of travel? But one time, one Sunday morning, there was a magazine called Psychology Today, I think, and they had a values chart, 36 values. So we separately wrote down and rated our 36 values. To our enormous surprise, we both came out with our first one being adventure. And our first three were exactly the same, and our bottom three, which were obedience, cleanliness. I forget what the third was, but it was.
Have you lost track of how many countries you visited?
Oh, yes. Our children gave us that globe for our 50th wedding anniversary, and it has a bunch of red stones, rubies we call them, and we blew them on, but I'm way behind. And I forget why did we have to count them up one time? And we're over 100, but we don't count when we've just been in the airport, or we like to go deep in our travel, and we do a tremendous amount of adventure travel with, like we've done 6 28-day treks in Nepal. And like in India, we're studying tribals, and we like a kind of in-depth travel that most people don't care for, and we're willing to. Well, we came back from Chile, 5 weeks in Chile, without a single plan, but we'd been to Chile enough. We just had a wonderful time just going to parks and walking and finding a hotel, and nothing planned. And I said, we're aging. We didn't stay in a single tent, a tree house, a cave, or a no-star.
Do you speak many languages?
No, I speak passable French, somewhat passable German, but I had a German nurse growing up, so I speak nursery German, not adult German. Raymond speaks Yiddish, which we both speak horrible Spanish, and we talk with our hands.
What has been your most absolute favorite place you've ever been?
Well, of course, home. But Nepal has meant a great deal to us. We've only had one tragedy in our lives. We've been extraordinarily fortunate. Our daughter died when she was 37, and we had a really very hard time, and people kept coming over, and we kept thinking, we've got to get away, and handle this our own way. And we found that there was a trip to Annapurna with a company we've been with a lot, and we just signed up in October and left. It made us feel how little we are, and how we can connect to the world, and put things in proportion for us. We just said to everybody on the trip, we're trying to get over this. We're not going to be very sociable. We're not going to sit around campfires. We just had to work it through. And I think we really have.
If you could give any piece of advice to Oklahomans, what would you tell them?
We've got such potential here. It makes me sick. We could be the most wonderful state. And I told the Centennial, I'll tell you what I told the Centennial Committee. I wish we could be first in everything we're last in, like education, and last in everything we're first in, like women's imprisonment, out of wedlock children, abortions, etc. And we can. It can be done here. I don't think people realize the potential of Oklahoma and how people are really good and want to do the right thing, but can be misled so easily. And then our legislature acts things like the 1407, is that it? About the immigrants, which just is kicking ourselves in the foot. And it's interesting again in relation to my mother, the two things that she was most active in was the League of Women Voters, well, the Highland Park Women's Club, which I'm not active in, and Planned Parenthood. And those are, I think we've really got to help people understand about sex. We are messing up people's lives terribly with uninformed views of sex. And I think of these young girls getting pregnant and having a baby and not being able to care for them properly. It's tragic, and I think this is a small enough state that we can do something. It's different when you've got a billion people like India and you see people lying on the streets.
Mm-hmm.
We don't have to have that in Oklahoma. We can work with people.
What would your advice be to women who plan on following in your footsteps?
Oh, enjoy it. Do it. Do it, do it, do it. Find the absolutely perfect husband. And if you don't have an absolutely perfect husband, do it yourself. But the rewards in terms of how you feel about life are so great. To get something done besides cleaning your house, which is going to get dirty the next day. I'm not a wonderful cook and I'm not a wonderful housekeeper. Luckily, we've had wonderful children, and so I may be an all right mother. But I just don't think that a lot of the things people put a lot of time and energy into are the things that count. And I think get some priorities and then take advantage of every opportunity you got.
Would you like to mention anybody or say anything about the people who have helped play an important role in your life? I know we spoke about your parents.
Parents, my husband, I think people have given me a chance. I think the League of Women Voters nurtured me here so that I learned about. I think I've been on some very, very good boards. Girl Scouts has been, I think it made me able to make choices and to see choices clearly. The new motto for Girl Scouts is "Where Girls Grow Strong," and I think I did. It's hard to think of myself as a strong woman. I don't, we all are weak inside. We all have very vulnerable spots. I think this has been a warm and gracious town to us. And I've had my mentors like Lucille Mulhall and Betty Bradstreet, and I imagine I've modeled myself after them. I think mentoring wasn't as in the vision of everybody, but those are both women who nurtured me through things, got me into things, probably kicked me in the butt.
Well, you mentioned your feelings toward Tulsa. What does Oklahoma mean to you?
Hmm. I I don't mean to be mushy about this, but I think Oklahoma means opportunity. I really do think so. And I know sometimes I get furious at it, particularly at the legislature. Uh, but the Community Service Council has, through our work here, the Community Service Council, under Phil Dessauer's leadership, has put Tulsa in the front and put Oklahoma in the front in early childhood education. Who would ever have thought we would have early childhood education? And it has to start with thinking and zeroing in on something that you think you can do, although everybody tells you you can't.
Well, when history is written about you, what would you like for it to say?
Wow. Well, I know what I say. I say I have to change the world. So maybe history should say she tried to change the world, so she failed. But
I think you made an impact.
but I think everybody can.
Mm-hmm.
I really, really think that. And I have learned so much about how to work with people. I really enjoy it. Just out of this thing, I went to a ballet board meeting this morning. We have one of the top ballets in the world. Who would ever have thought that except Marston Larkin and Yasha, Roman Jasinski, her husband, whom I met when they first came here and said they'd been with the Ballet Russe. And I said, oh, my best friend growing up till second grade, Barbara Steele. Barbara, she was my roommate in the Ballet Russe. And so I think of the day that she and Rosalie Talbot called me up and said, we want to start a ballet. Will you write the bylaws? Sure. Who knows what's going to happen from just a little work.
Well, what's next on the agenda for you? What do you have coming up here on the horizon?
I want to move this arts in the schools along. I'm on the board of A+ schools, which is a national but statewide. I'm on the state board. And I think we can get schools much more involved in arts, and that way they will find, I mean, there's no question that children perform better. I went to New York about 8 years ago, I'm not sure when, and got the National Music Teachers Award for grassroots work. And they took me to some schools for what I'd done here. And they took me to some schools in New York, in the Bronx, mm-hmm. the worst schools. And it was summer, and they took me to a class of first graders, all of whom had failed. And they were learning arithmetic. First, they all made notes. They could choose a whole note, a half note, a quarter note, an eighth note, a 16th note. They made the note the size that they were. And then they would say, how many quarter notes are there in a whole note? And they would run across the room. The first four that got there won. And they were 4 quarter notes that made a whole note. And they were doing it with eighths and sixteenths and triplets, and they were hearing the music, feeling the beat, but they were crack at math. In first grade, they knew how to add, subtract, and do fractions, 1/4 a note, 1/8 a note. I think we've got to discover ways of teaching that engage. Do you remember hours of teaching when you were bored? I was.
Well, it's great that they're able to integrate music and math. And if we cut out arts, we lose that aspect.
Yeah. I mean, I really think that finding the ways of teaching children really well is perhaps the most important thing we can do. Now, I'm in India. They are teaching the tribals so badly with rote learning, and it means nothing, and they're all over the floor doing nothing and not listening. But they learn a little. But then it doesn't have any relevance for them. I should have mentioned that my public school was so big. I did mention it was so big on nature, and that has had a big carryover for me. You know, it's bird feeders everywhere.
Mm-hmm. That's great. Well, is there anything that I haven't asked you today that you'd like to mention?
Yeah. What do you regret about yourself, Nancy?
Well, tell us, Nancy.
Well, every New Year's I decide to be less judgmental and more patient, but I've never achieved either. I don't have as much self-discipline as I would like and I think is necessary. And I'm very impatient and sometimes impatient with people, and I wish I weren't. I really want to be polite and nice and respectful to everyone. And I think I deeply respect other people. But when I get in a hurry, I don't always show it. But I think anybody can do this. You know, I don't think I'm a very special person at all. I mean, I'm not saying this to be charming, and because you're supposed to be self-deprecatory, but I don't really think I'm a special person.
You think everybody could make a difference?
Yes, I do.
What are some ways some little ways that just ordinary people can make differences every day?
Well, I think a lot of women make differences in their home by, just what they could, to create an atmosphere that's stimulating and respectful of others, respectful of other ideas. But I think you can go beyond that, and I think you should go beyond that. Life is so much easier now than it was for our forefathers and foremothers, that we can do more than just keep a house clean. I find I'm very impatient with women who knit coat hangers. Because I think they could do something more. And maybe their ambitions have been squelched when they were young. And I think we've got to have the courage of our convictions, even though sometimes it slaps you in the face. One of the things that has been on my mind, but that I did help start, was a group that is flourishing today. It's the First Wednesday Reading Club. There were no ways of black and white women to get together. And so a group of us just started a reading club. And we had to meet in homes because you couldn't meet anywhere else. And it's now a great group. But it was, and Oprah has celebrated us, and because it was one of the first of these things.
How many members?
Now?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I don't know, about 30. But it was small in the beginning.
Was it tough trying to help break those race barriers back then?
Yes. Yes. And you were criticized for it.
Mm-hmm.
And the blacks were too. It was equally hard for them. luckily we had a good group of black women, Gladys, and then Gladys died, and Norval married another woman named Teresa, who was just terrific. He married great women, and they had a little boy exactly the age of our youngest. John is now 50. Let's see, he was born in 58, so he's 50. And I remember one of his birthday parties with Van Coots there, and someone said, who's the mother with us? Who's the child who has a chauffeur bringing her with Dr. Coots? I mean, you couldn't, people, it just wasn't done. Actually, we started it because our oldest son, Richard, said something. We were driving, we lived on 46th and Lewis then. We were driving out, and the bus stop had a bunch of black maids, obviously maids, waiting at the bus stop. And he said, look at all the maids waiting at the bus stop. And I just, how do you know they're maids? Maybe they're professors. What? I was just furious at him. And I thought, we better get some black friends for him, and better get him introduced to some other people. And it was hard in Tulsa.
Mm-hmm.
It was just plain hard. There were no ways to go. So we started a play group, and but you know, you gotta erase those images. Listening to Obama's speech yesterday, when he talked about his minister and his white grandmother, I thought, there it is. What are we passing down to children?
Well, we have a long way to go, but we've come a long way.
We have come, and I want people to know that. I mean, sometimes they get discouraged, but we have, I mean, this was a really segregated community.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know where Yohola Park is now?
I do not.
Out at Mohawk Park. Well, the first year we were married, they were going to build the new reservoir, and they were taking away Colonel Young Park, which is the black park. So guess who thinks she has to stop this? Nancy Feldman. And so I met with the park board and the park supervisor, Mr. Ziegler, and a group of us, all black men except for me, went on Mr. Ziegler said he'd show us possible land for a park, but he wasn't going with us. And we went through this horrible place with, and said, yes, we'll take it as a park. At the end of it, I said, that's the last bit of segregated something I ever work for. But otherwise there would have been no park for them, and no chance. And it's nearer their community than ours. But I made very good friends among the black community there. We were really close friends. There was a lawyer named Primus Wade, and Primus and I decided to go to the Mayo, the 16th floor of the Mayo, to a bar association meeting. Well, the bar association didn't recognize the women, and they certainly weren't going to have a black going into the Mayo. So we went down and had lunch on the river by ourselves.
Did you make an attempt to go in?
Oh yes, and it was a wonderful moment because Primus couldn't get in the elevator, so we went to get a waiter and put a white thing around his head. And I had a big pin. He put that on. We went up.
You're a big multitasker.
A what?
A big multitasker.
Yes. Oh yes. I think women grew up multitasking.
I agree. I think men sometimes have trouble.
When they started talking about multitasking, I said, I've always done that.
Well, we were actually towards the tail end of the interview.
Okay.
Is there anything else you'd like to add that we haven't spoken about today? We've covered.
No, I feel incredibly grateful, and I don't want this to sound. I do feel very, very, very grateful to my family, first of all, to my husband, to our friends, and to the city of Tulsa and the state of Oklahoma. I really do. I think I could not have thrived so well anywhere else.
Well, we do appreciate your time today. Thank you very much for participating.
You are very welcome.